Hey, welcome back to Edgar Cayce Narratives. And if you've been following this channel for a while, you might have noticed that some of the most confusing experiences in life are not the big dramatic ones, but the quiet moments that don't seem to follow any clear logic. I want to start with a very simple situation that may have already happened to you, or something close to it, where you meet someone for the first time and within just a few minutes something feels different in a way that is hard to describe but impossible to ignore. There is no clear reason for it, because you don't share a past, you don't know their story, and nothing in that moment should feel important yet. But the feeling is already there, and it does not wait for time to build. It is not just attraction or curiosity, and it does not feel like something new, because it feels closer to recognition, as if something inside you responds before you have time to think about it. And the strange part is this: nothing about this moment should feel that deep, and yet it already does. It usually begins in a very ordinary way, in a place that does not feel special at all, where two people meet without any expectation that this moment will matter later. And the situation looks exactly like countless other introductions that happen every day. The conversation starts normally, with simple questions and short answers that follow a familiar pattern. And nothing in those first few sentences suggests that anything unusual is happening, because everything appears casual, polite, and easy to move through. But then something shifts, not in a dramatic or obvious way, but in a subtle change that is easy to miss if you are not paying attention, where the conversation stops feeling like an exchange between strangers and begins to feel more natural, more fluid, and strangely comfortable. There is no awkward pause that usually comes with meeting someone new, and there is no effort to think about what to say next, because the words seem to come on their own, and the interaction starts to feel less like a first meeting, and more like a continuation of something that was already in motion. You might notice that you are sharing more than you normally would at this stage, not because you decided to open up, but because it happens without resistance, and the other person responds in the same way, as if both of you are moving at a pace that does not match the situation. What makes this moment difficult to explain is that there is no clear reason for this level of comfort, because you cannot point to shared experiences, mutual history, or anything that would justify the depth of the interaction that is already forming between you. Even the smallest details begin to feel familiar, from the way they speak to the way they react. And although you know logically that this is the first time you are meeting, something in your perception does not fully accept that as the complete truth. This is where the experience becomes more noticeable, because you start to feel that the connection is not being built from the beginning, but instead is revealing something that already exists beneath the surface. Something that does not follow the usual timeline of getting to know someone. And yet, if someone asked you to explain why this feels different, you would not be able to give a clear answer, because there is nothing concrete to point to, no event or detail that explains why this person feels more familiar than they should. All you have is the feeling itself, immediate, quiet, and persistent, as if your mind is trying to catch up to something your experience has already accepted without question. As the interaction continues, what stands out is not just that the conversation flows easily, but that it begins to move deeper at a pace that does not match the reality of how long you have known each other. And this shift happens without any clear decision from either side to make it happen. Topics that would normally take days or even weeks to reach start appearing much earlier, and you find yourself talking about personal experiences, thoughts, and perspectives that are usually kept for people you trust. Yet here, that sense of trust seems to form almost instantly without going through the usual steps. There is a growing feeling that you already understand how the other person thinks, not in a complete or detailed way, but in a general sense that feels stable and familiar, as if you can predict their reactions or recognize their emotional patterns without needing much explanation. At the same time, the other person seems to respond to you in a similar way, and this creates a kind of feedback loop where both sides feel seen and understood faster than expected. And this mutual recognition strengthens the connection without requiring effort or time to develop. What makes this even more unusual is that there is very little uncertainty in the interaction. Because instead of trying to figure each other out step by step, it feels like both of you are moving through something that is already partially known, even if you cannot explain how or why that is happening. In most relationships, there is a gradual process where people test boundaries, observe behavior, and slowly build a sense of safety. But here, that process seems to be shortened or even skipped, and the connection moves forward without the hesitation that normally protects people from getting too close too quickly. You might notice that you are not questioning the pace as much as you normally would, because the experience feels natural despite being objectively unusual. And this creates a quiet contradiction between what you know should happen and what is actually happening. There is also a sense of ease in silence, where even moments without conversation do not feel uncomfortable or forced. And this kind of comfort usually takes time to build. Yet here it appears early, as if it has already been established before the meeting even began. As this continues, the idea starts to form that this is not just a strong first impression, but something more consistent and structured, because the connection does not fade after the initial interaction, and instead, it holds its intensity or even deepens with continued contact. You begin to recognize a pattern, not only in what you feel, but in how the interaction unfolds. And this pattern suggests that the connection is not developing in the usual way, but is following a different path that does not rely on time as its main factor. And even though everything seems to be moving faster than it should, there is no clear signal telling you to slow down, because the experience does not feel unstable or forced. And this makes it even harder to question or challenge what is happening. At this point, the connection starts to feel less like something new that is forming, and more like something that is being uncovered, as if the process is not about building from zero, but about revealing something that was already present in a form you could not see before. And that is where the pattern becomes clear, because what you are experiencing is not just a strong connection, but a connection that behaves as if it already has a history, even when no such history exists in your current life. At a certain point, the experience stops feeling simply interesting and starts to raise questions. Because even though the connection feels natural, it does not fully align with what you know about how relationships usually develop. And this creates a quiet tension that is difficult to ignore. You begin to notice that the level of emotional comfort does not match the amount of time you have spent together. And this mismatch becomes more visible the longer the interaction continues, because the depth keeps increasing without the foundation that normally supports it. There is a clear contradiction between two things that are happening at the same time, where on one side you understand logically that this is still a new connection with no shared past, but on the other side you feel a level of familiarity that suggests something much older and more established. This creates a subtle form of confusion, because your mind tries to organize the experience using familiar explanations, yet none of them fully fit, and every attempt to reduce it to coincidence, personality match, or simple attraction feels incomplete. You may start asking yourself simple but persistent questions, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, internal dialogue that keeps returning, where you wonder why this feels so easy, why trust appeared so quickly, and why the interaction seems to move forward without the usual uncertainty. At the same time, there is a hesitation to question the experience too much, because nothing about it feels negative or unstable, and this makes it harder to challenge what is happening, since the connection does not give you a clear reason to doubt it. This is where the tension becomes more complex, because it is not driven by fear or conflict, but by a mismatch between logic and experience, where everything feels right emotionally while remaining unclear intellectually. and this gap continues to widen as the connection deepens. You might also notice that the sense of familiarity does not fade with time, which would normally happen if it were based on a temporary impression. But instead, it remains consistent, and in some cases, it even becomes stronger as more interactions take place. The more you try to explain it using normal frameworks, the more you realize that those frameworks depend on time, shared events, and gradual exposure, and none of those factors are strong enough here to justify what you are feeling. This leads to a more direct question that begins to take shape, not necessarily spoken out loud, but clearly present in your awareness, where you start to ask whether this connection is actually beginning now, or if it is continuing from something you cannot see. And this question changes the way you look at the situation, because instead of trying to understand how the connection is forming, you begin to wonder whether it was already formed in some way before this moment, and what you are experiencing now is only the surface of something deeper. At this point, the experience is no longer just about meeting someone new, because it carries a sense that the starting point you can observe may not be the true beginning. And this idea, even if it remains uncertain, becomes difficult to dismiss once it appears. When you step back from a single experience and start looking at a wider range of situations, you begin to see that this kind of connection is not limited to one type of relationship, and it does not follow a single predictable form, because it appears in many different contexts that share the same underlying feeling. In some cases, it shows up as an instant friendship, where two people meet and quickly move past the surface level of interaction. And within a short time, they are talking, thinking, and responding to each other in a way that feels unusually aligned without needing a long period of adjustment. These friendships often carry a sense of stability from the beginning, where both people feel comfortable being themselves without needing to manage impressions or slowly reveal who they are. And this creates a dynamic that feels established rather than newly formed. In other cases, the pattern appears in romantic connections, where the intensity is noticeable almost immediately, and the emotional bond seems to develop faster than expected, not just in terms of attraction, but in the depth of understanding and emotional response. What stands out in these situations is not only how quickly the connection forms, but how naturally both people move into it, as if they are not negotiating a new relationship, but stepping into something that already has a structure and direction. There are also situations where the connection does not become a long-term relationship at all, but still leaves a strong impression, where a brief encounter with someone creates a sense of familiarity that stays in memory long after the interaction ends. In these cases, the duration of the interaction does not match the impact it has, because even a short conversation can carry the same feeling of recognition and depth that usually takes much longer to build. And this makes the experience stand out more clearly. Another variation appears in environments where people are not expecting meaningful connections, such as during travel, work, or random social situations, where the context does not suggest anything significant. Yet the same pattern still emerges without warning. Across all these different cases, certain elements remain consistent, where the connection feels immediate. The emotional understanding appears early, and the sense of familiarity cannot be traced back to any clear shared experience. This consistency becomes important, because it suggests that the experience is not random or isolated, but part of a broader pattern that repeats across different people, places, and situations, even when the details of each case are different. You may also notice that many people describe this experience using similar language, even when they have never discussed it with each other. And they often refer to the feeling as recognition, familiarity, or a sense of having known the other person before. At the same time, the interpretations of this experience can vary widely, where some people see it as coincidence, others as emotional compatibility, and others as something they cannot fully define. And this range of explanations reflects how difficult it is to place the experience within a single framework. What becomes clear is that the pattern exists independently of how it is explained, because regardless of the interpretation, the core experience remains the same, and it continues to appear in ways that follow a similar structure. And when a pattern repeats across different situations with the same core characteristics, it raises a more important question, not about any single instance, but about the nature of the pattern itself and what it might be pointing to beneath the surface. Because if this kind of connection can appear in multiple forms, across different people, and without a clear external cause, then the explanation may not be found in the situation alone, but in something deeper that operates across those situations in a consistent way. When we try to understand this experience from a psychological perspective, the first thing that becomes clear is that the human mind is highly sensitive to patterns, especially patterns that feel familiar, because familiarity often signals safety, predictability, and emotional alignment. One possible explanation is that we are responding to subtle cues in the other person that match internal patterns we have already developed. And these cues can include tone of voice, facial expressions, body language, and ways of reacting that resemble people we have known before. These signals are often processed quickly and without conscious awareness, which means that by the time we notice the feeling of connection, our mind may have already completed a complex process of comparison and recognition in the background. Another layer of explanation comes from attachment patterns, where early emotional experiences shape how we respond to others later in life. And this can lead to strong reactions when we encounter someone who fits a familiar emotional structure, even if we do not consciously recognize why. In this case, the sense of connection may not be about the person themselves, but about how they activate something that already exists within us. And this can create the impression that the bond is immediate and meaningful, even if it is based on internal associations. There is also the concept of projection, where we unconsciously assign meaning, qualities, or expectations to another person based on our own internal world. And this can make someone feel more familiar or significant than they actually are in objective terms. Projection can be powerful because it fills in gaps quickly, allowing us to experience a sense of understanding or connection without needing complete information. And this can contribute to the feeling that we already know the other person. At the same time, not all recognition is projection, and this creates an important distinction, because sometimes the connection may be based on genuine compatibility, shared values, or similar ways of thinking that align naturally without being forced. This is where the explanation becomes more complex, because the same experience can be interpreted in different ways depending on which factors are emphasized, and there is no single framework that fully accounts for every case. If we say that everything is projection, we ignore the possibility of real alignment between people. And if we say that everything is recognition, we risk overlooking the role of internal patterns that shape our perception. The mind tends to look for clear answers, but in this situation, the evidence points in multiple directions, where some aspects of the connection can be explained through psychology, while others remain less defined and harder to reduce to known mechanisms. This creates a balanced perspective, where we can acknowledge that part of the experience may come from how we process familiarity and emotional cues, while also recognizing that this explanation does not fully capture the depth or consistency of what people report. The key point here is not to choose one explanation over the other, but to understand that the feeling itself is real, even if its origin is not fully clear, and that the experience deserves to be examined without reducing it too quickly to a single cause. And once we reach that point, where psychology explains part of the experience but not all of it, the question naturally expands beyond what we can observe in behavior and perception. And this is where another perspective begins to enter the discussion. At this point, where psychological explanations provide structure, but do not fully resolve the experience. Another perspective begins to offer a different way of looking at the same pattern. And this is where the readings of Edgar Cayce become relevant as a lens rather than a conclusion. In Cayce's interpretation, not all human connections begin at the moment we become aware of them, and some relationships may carry continuity that extends beyond what we can observe within a single lifetime, which means that what feels immediate may not actually be new in the way we assume. He described situations where individuals feel an instant sense of familiarity because the connection did not start in the present, but instead continues from prior interactions that are no longer consciously remembered, yet still influence emotional responses and relational patterns. From this perspective, the intensity and ease that appear early in a connection are not the result of something forming quickly, but the result of something resuming, where the emotional structure is already in place and simply becomes active again when the two people meet. This idea reframes the experience in a very specific way, because instead of asking how two strangers can feel so connected in such a short time, the question shifts toward whether they are actually strangers at all in a deeper sense that is not immediately visible. Cayce's readings often suggested that unresolved emotional bonds, shared experiences, or strong relational dynamics can carry forward. And when those same individuals encounter each other again, the recognition is not based on memory in the usual sense, but on a form of continuity that expresses itself through feeling. This does not mean that every strong connection must be explained in this way, and it does not require belief in any specific system, but it offers a framework that accounts for aspects of the experience that are difficult to explain through psychology alone. It also introduces a different way of understanding familiarity, where the feeling is not created in the moment, but revealed, and where the speed of connection reflects prior depth rather than present development. At the same time, this perspective does not reject psychological explanations, because internal patterns and emotional structures still play a role in how we perceive and respond to others, and both layers can exist together without canceling each other out. What makes this reframing valuable is not that it provides a final answer, but that it expands the range of possible explanations, allowing the experience to be seen from more than one angle without forcing it into a single interpretation. And when you hold both views at the same time, the psychological and the Cayce perspective, the experience begins to feel less contradictory, because what seems immediate on the surface may be connected to something that extends beyond the moment in ways that are not directly visible. This does not close the question, but it changes its direction, because instead of asking why the connection feels so strong so quickly, you begin to ask whether the starting point you can see is actually the beginning at all. When we place both perspectives side by side, the psychological explanation and the Cayce interpretation, the experience begins to take on a more complete shape, because each one explains a different layer of what is happening without fully replacing the other. From a psychological point of view, the mind recognizes patterns, responds to familiar cues, and builds a sense of connection based on internal structures that have developed over time. And this explains why the feeling can appear quickly and feel real even without a shared history. At the same time, the Cayce perspective suggests that what we are responding to may not only come from internal conditioning, but also from continuity that extends beyond the present moment. And this introduces the possibility that the familiarity we feel is not entirely constructed in real time. When these two views are combined, the experience no longer needs to be reduced to a single cause, because it can be understood as something that operates on multiple levels at once, where internal patterns shape perception, while deeper continuity may shape the connection itself. This integrated view helps explain why the feeling can be both immediate and stable, because psychological recognition can create instant familiarity, while a deeper layer, if it exists, can provide the consistency that allows the connection to persist beyond the first impression. It also clarifies why some connections fade quickly while others continue to grow, because in some cases, the experience may be driven mainly by projection or temporary alignment, while in others there may be a stronger underlying structure that supports the connection over time. This distinction becomes important because it allows us to observe the pattern without forcing all experiences into the same category, and instead recognize that similar feelings can emerge from different combinations of factors. You begin to see that the question is not whether one explanation is correct and the other is wrong, but how much each layer contributes to a specific experience. And this shifts the focus from choosing an answer to understanding the structure of the pattern. In this way, the experience becomes less mysterious in a confusing sense and more structured in a way that can be observed, where immediate attraction, familiarity, and emotional depth are not random events, but signals that something is aligning across different levels at once. It also changes how you respond to these connections, because instead of reacting only to the intensity of the feeling, you can begin to observe how it develops over time, and this gives you a clearer sense of whether the connection has depth or is only temporary. At the same time, this perspective does not remove the sense of curiosity, because even when you understand the possible layers involved, the experience still carries something that is not fully defined, and this keeps the question open without making it unclear. What becomes clear is that connection may not always start at the moment it appears, and what feels instant may be the visible part of a process that is already in motion, shaped by both internal patterns and something that may extend beyond them. And when you look at it this way, the experience is no longer just about meeting someone new, but about encountering a connection that may have more depth than the situation itself seems to contain. At this point, after looking at the experience from different angles, the main idea becomes clearer, not because every detail is explained, but because the pattern itself can now be understood in a more direct and grounded way. The first thing to recognize is that the feeling of instant connection is real, and it should not be dismissed simply because it appears quickly or without an obvious cause, because the speed of the experience does not make it less valid. At the same time, the origin of that feeling is not always visible on the surface, and this is where confusion often begins, because we tend to assume that what we feel must come from what we can clearly see in the present moment. But in this case, the experience suggests something different, where the intensity of the connection may not reflect how fast it is being created, but how much of it is already in place before we become aware of it. From a psychological perspective, this means that internal patterns, emotional memory, and recognition mechanisms can create a sense of familiarity that feels immediate, even if the source of that familiarity is not consciously accessible. From the Cayce perspective, this means that some connections may not begin in this life at all, and what we experience as a starting point may actually be a continuation of something that has already developed in a different context. When these two views are held together, the core insight becomes simple but important, which is that not everything we experience begins where it appears to begin, and not every connection follows the timeline we expect. This shifts the way we interpret these moments, because instead of asking why something feels so strong so quickly, we begin to consider that the strength may come from depth rather than speed. It also helps reduce the need to immediately define or label the experience, because the value of the connection does not depend on how well we can explain it in the moment, but on how it unfolds over time. In a practical sense, this means paying attention to what remains consistent, what grows, and what fades, rather than relying only on the intensity of the first impression, because not every strong beginning leads to a lasting connection. What stays with us, and what continues to develop in a stable way, often reveals more about the nature of the connection than the initial feeling itself. And when you understand this, the experience becomes less about trying to solve a mystery and more about observing a pattern that unfolds in front of you with its own logic and timing. At the end of this, the experience does not need to be reduced to a single explanation, because what matters more is how you understand and respond to it when it happens in your own life, and whether you choose to observe it carefully or simply move past it without reflection. There will be moments where someone feels instantly familiar, where the connection appears without effort, and where the sense of knowing them seems to arrive before any real knowledge is formed. And those moments are easy to overlook if you try to explain them too quickly. But if you slow down and pay attention, you may begin to notice that these experiences follow patterns, and that what feels sudden on the surface may be connected to something deeper that unfolds over time in ways that are not immediately visible. So the question is not whether the feeling is real, because it clearly is, but whether you are looking at the beginning of something new or the continuation of something you do not yet fully understand. And this leads to a simple question that you can carry with you, not as something you need to answer right away, but as something to observe when the situation appears again. When someone feels instantly familiar, are you really meeting them for the first time, or are you recognizing something that has been there longer than you realize? If this made you think about your own experiences, let me know in the comments. And you can also share any connection you have not been able to explain yet, or any pattern you keep noticing in your life. And if there is a topic you want me to explore next, you can leave that below as well. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story here on Edgar Cayce Narratives.